I call this show Whimsical Retrospective because it's a retrospective of the last 15 years at least of my work in photography and watercolor and merging the two media. And even my advertisement explaining what the show is all about. I had done a recent watercolor, cut out a piece from my photograph and put a little ginkgo leaf up there. So it is whimsical, it's supposed to be fun. And it begins with my early black and white photography and moves through 3 different kinds of cameras, which is why it's called parts 1, 2, and 3. In part 1, there's work that was done with 3 different cameras and black and white film and some color film, all manual, and then moving finally into digital, and then watercolors, and then the merging of the 2 of those. At that point, I was bulk loading my own film, mixing my chemicals in the bathroom and heating them on the stove and doing everything sort of by the seat of my pants, borrowing an enlarger. So this particular one, I had no timing light, standing in my bedroom in the dark, cutting out pieces of cardboard to raise and lower as I took different exposures of different negatives and creating a kind of collage effect. And the one below that is also that same technique, only that was shot with my old Minolta film camera and a tripod, because obviously I'm in the picture. And this photograph also was taken with the old Minolta manual camera. And clearly by now I could print in color. And this is called The Woman in the Wall. She's on a stone wall on Black Beach near Magnolia, below Gloucester. And I kept walking back and forth, trying to figure out why I was called back to this one spot on the wall. This is clearly my shadow, but if you can see close up, she has on a blue jumper that is being blown up over her knee. She has black stockings on. She has a black bag. You can see her arm coming around, perfect hand and fist. This arm goes up with a white glove shading her eyes. So I call it The Woman in the Wall. I think she was calling to me, she wanted out. And this other picture, again with the old manual camera, was taken in Melrose. People often ask me when I was in Tibet or what my travels in India were like. This was in somebody's garden across the street from the library in Melrose, and I love it. Actually, the Melrose Library purchased a copy of this, and so if you like it, you can take it out on loan there. I have a lot of photos with my favorite models, which are ocean ponds, and this one in particular is from up in Lanesville, and I call it Spanish lace because that's the way the trees remind me. But all of these are sort of pre-Photoshop. So what you see is what you get, and that's the wonderful thing about those old film cameras. The optics, you look through it, you see what you wanted, and that's what you got. Unlike the ones today where they sort of try to suck everything in and give you a panoramic view. It distorts and doesn't give you as much control as the old manual cameras did. And this is Good Harbor, one of my other favorite models. I love that big old mansion there. I used to start going out there when that was the only one there. And you'll see further on that there's another picture of the same place taken from the same point of view, but it's with what I'm talking about, the new optics in the more digitized cameras. That is a camera that has a light meter inside of it. And this one is kind of closer to home. I guess this is Melrose. And this was taken at Spot Pond, and the sunset is reflecting on the ice. So I call it pink ice. This is another one, the same spot in Annisquam, a woman who lives in a stone house near Plum Cove. in Annisquam, Lanesville, has told me that the National Geographic said this was the second most beautiful place in the world to take sunset shots. So I have a lot of them, as you'll see further on. This blank spot here represents one of the photos that was sold just yesterday. A woman said she really needed to take it home with her. So although this particular show wasn't really set up for sales, I was happy to sell her that. It was a picture of a woman dancing with all the feathers and finery of Carnival in Cambridge in Central Square, probably close to 12 years ago. So that particular piece that you can't see is the companion piece to the next one that we're going to. This is what I was referring to as the companion piece of the one that was sold, because this is another beautiful young black woman who was participating in Carnival, which in the old days was a huge festival right in the middle of Central Square. It's been since moved down closer to MIT. But I call her La Madonna, because to me she just looks like the Madonna. These are different scenes of Spy Pawn, Spot Pawn. This is Spot Pawn, and this is Horn Pawn. I have to say, I'm probably most in love with Horn Pawn. I think that sunset it's so typical of that area. And as I mentioned before, with the different optics in the newer cameras that have the digital timing devices in them, they also changed the scene you think you're taking a picture of. So this, in contrast with the old one that I previously showed you of Good Harbor, I think it's also a very beautiful picture of Good Harbor and the old mansion. It is very different, as you can tell. So it took me a while to get used to the new optics and to having a light meter inside the camera that was telling me, no, you're off, you're on, because I was always, prior to that, I had a little tiny handheld Weston light meter, and I decided what the depth of field was, what the aperture was, you know, what the composition was, and I had to get used to working with a camera that had a built-in light meter and was indicating to me what the camera thought it should be. And as I said, changing the optics. So this is a series of shots with that newer camera. It was a Canon Rebel, nothing very fancy. It did have a zoom lens from 28 to 80. The other was a stationary 50mm lens, so that was also new and kind of fun to deal with. It allowed me to get some really nice long-distance shots. So basically, these are some more of the water-based shots that I like to take at different ponds. Again, Horn Pond predominates, and Good Harbor. I love that scene with the whole sky filling up with clouds after the sunset. So, and this was also in Melrose at Spot Pond. It's hard to keep track of Spot Pond, Spy Pond, Horn Pond, but they are my favorite places locally to do photography. And then a friend of mine said, I have a small digital camera and I'd like to give it to you. And I said, no way, I only do film. I take my time, I compose a picture, I figure out my own lighting and all that. There's no way I'm going to take a point and shoot digital. However, he said, take it, and if you have fun with it, that will make me happy. So as you can see, I did take the digital camera and went to Horn Pond, one of my favorite spots, and captured these particular pictures of the swans in the fall. And I think they're gorgeous. I really love the fact that I had that handy little camera I could just pull out and no manual alterations, just shooting it. So I don't have Photoshop. I have to tell you, if you go to Horn Pond in the fall, this is the kind of color you will see in the water. Of course, it'll be all over the place, and you'll have to do what I did, decide what really is going to make. I still frame my shots, even though with digital prints, as you know, most commercial places crop the shot. That's very hard for me to think about shooting something that somebody else is going to crop. But nevertheless, I think they turned out beautifully. So this is the beginning of part 2 of my whimsical retrospective, which is the watercolors that I started learning how to do back in my mid-60s. And I call this one Exotic Arlington because these huge leaves that I've forgotten the name of were growing in somebody's yard in Arlington. And I used them as the main focus of the painting. And then I took pictures of other kinds of flowers and things that were growing around that area. And I guess that's one of the mergers, because although it's completely a watercolor, I had merged subjects, in this case plants and leaves, from 3 different sources. And I call that sort of beginner's luck, because I do like it, and I had not had any professional or schooling in watercolor prior to that. And then this watercolor was actually one that I did when I was in the vineyard in 9/11. A friend had invited me down to stay with her and her son while the father took off from Logan. His plane went out before the ones that met with the disaster. And so one of the places we went to was Akina, which is a lot of people still know as Gay Head. So that begins sort of the watercolor paintings. I actually have one here that is a little bit out of place, because although it's a watercolor painting, it's one of the merges. It's a watercolor that I did in Belfast, and then that's the trees and the water. And then I cut out one of my photographs of a sand sculpture in the Revere Sand Sculpture Festival. So I would remember what everything came from. I called it Revered Lion Captured in Belfast, Maine. And then, as we move right along, these are more examples of that rather short period when I was doing some watercolors, but it really, I said, as a beginner, really enjoying them. And I'm very pleased that, having pulled them out of hibernation, I found that people who've come to the show really like them. So I'm very pleasantly surprised and pleased. But this is again from that day in Edgartown at 9/11. That is the little son, he's now a huge man, of my friend running towards the Edgartown Lake carrying his pail and his shovel. Other watercolors here are a tree that took on an interesting shape, as it seemed to almost be 2 trees coming together or 2 trees separating in the fells in Melrose. And then these very exotic trees, which I have to tell you, they probably do not look very much like the actual trees there, but it's the images that came off of my palette and my brush that I really enjoyed. And it was painted sitting on the grass in front of the Weeks Bridge and Memorial Drive, so you can see the Weeks Bridge in the background. And I'm sure these trees are now enormous, because that was quite a few years ago. One that I do think is worthy of mention is what I call my award-winning thistles, because in the Williamstown Art Show, I actually won a ribbon for this, and I think it's probably what some might call the most painterly of all the pieces that I've hung for the watercolors. And I think that these were the ones I chose for examples of my dedication to learning watercolor. And then moving on from there, I began to take out the paintings and merge them with some recent photography. This begins part 3 of my whimsical retrospective. Part 3 being where I've merged my paintings from the past with current photography. In the back of this one is a large photo of the Barnes Room in the Unitarian Universalist Church in Harvard Square. And if you get up close enough, you can see the little tombstones in the oldest cemetery down below. And I put that together with a cutout from a painting I did of a glass of wine or juice. I can't remember exactly what it was now, and also a rooster that I took a picture of out in Littleton. And I called it Rooster's Choice. I've wanted to ask people what they thought this picture was about, because when you're doing these kind of things of merging different things from your creative life and your subconscious or unconscious, there's usually a story, and I would like to know what kind of a story that provokes for other people. The next picture is a merging again of my photography with a painting. That house is actually located across from the library in Melrose. However, if you go there looking for it, you won't recognize it because there is no landscaping. I put in the trees, the gardens, and the lawn, and then just occurred to me to put myself in there now as the current photographer. Someone has said that a signature of my work in terms of these mergers is always having a leg or a foot or something hanging outside of the picture, which I like because it gives you a sense of two things going on at once. Also, the watercolor paper is one texture, and since this isn't photoshopped, the hand cut out photo is another texture, so that gives another contrast to it. The one next to that is what I call my mariachi plant. Simply because it's an old painting that I had done in Melrose of flowers that I just made up in my mind. And then last year when I was coming back from California, they had a dance festival in Harvard Square, so I took pictures of these mariachis, and they just seemed to want to dance on top of that painting. The other one is a huge aloe vera plant that I was drawing and painting, and again, I put myself in there alongside of it, just as a whimsical addition that to me made it more fun to look at. The one that I call Rockport Resident was an old painting that I had started and never finished, and I really liked the scene of the street in Rockport, and I didn't know I knew something had to go in the road, but I didn't know what it was going to be. So when I started doing these mergers, I had taken a photograph recently of the silver statue of a dog in front of Emerson Umbrella in Concord. So I cut him out. He's looking over his hindquarters at a little bird that's perched there. And I used watercolor pencils and made him more authentic fur-looking colors rather than the aluminum. Although I really like the aluminum, and an artist friend of mine did too. But this is what it ended up to be, and I'm so glad that he found a place in Rockport, and I found something to finish that painting with. I thought that merging watercolors and photography was something that was brand new, but I realized that I had actually done this many, many years ago when I was driving around one evening looking for something to paint because I was learning how to paint, and I ended up in front of the Arlington Senior Center, and there was a bushel basket of flowers, and I just sat down on the hood of the car and painted that bushel basket of flowers. Then when I got home, I was cutting out some things I liked from my recent photography and cut out this little bunch of flowers and just kind of tossed it near that painting, and it came close enough that I could see that those flowers from the photograph belonged with the flowers that were in the painting. And to this day, the people who have come to see this show have had a very hard time telling what was the difference between what was painted and what is the photograph. Since this show was hung, I continued to work on some more merges. This is an old painting I did in one of my first adult ed classes that I liked, in spite of the fact that it's very contemporary American folk art that is not primitive, it's contemporary American folk art. That means self-taught. And then recently I pulled it out and cut out my photograph of the duck on the commons in Make Way for Ducklings. And as you can see, as a friend of mine has said, my signature now with these merging pieces seems to be to have at least 1 foot hanging outside of the actual frame or mat. And this is the second piece that I've most recently done of the merging of photography with the watercolor. I painted the forest scene and then cut out some reeds and put those in the picture, and then the photograph of the 2 women dancing in the woods. This is the first time I've used a photograph that wasn't my own. You know, this is, I think this is an ongoing project for me to find ways to merge my watercolors with my paintings, because it gives a life to both of them that I really find humorous and fun and entertaining, and I'm happy that other people have too. This is one of the first that I tried attempting to merge my watercolor with my photography. I had done the painting of the vegetables, was not very satisfied with it, painted in the maple leaves that I had found on the bike path where I live in Arlington, and then went out, as I said before, to Littleton and took pictures of these roosters and chickens. To me, it has an Amish sense to it. I'm originally from Iowa, and maybe that's why I think it reminds me of the farmers out there. The one below it is another collection of leaves. Actually, they're my paintings of leaves that I found on the bike path, and I found that cutting out a picture of me in my new blouse from Oaxaca added to the picture in some way for me. So again, the intention is to be whimsical, to have fun, find a little bit of humor. This is the last piece I have in the show on the merging of the photography with the watercolor, and this one is particularly whimsical. Someone who was giving an outdoor watercolor class in Melrose walked us out into all the greenery in the gardens, and then did a line drawing of a lighthouse and said, "All right, now paint that." So that's why I call it the Melrose Lighthouse, because there is no lighthouse in Melrose, but that was the painting that I did based on her drawing. And then I found that I had this photograph of myself sitting on the Bass Rocks in Gloucester, and that it just seemed to fit beautifully right there. So this is the Melrose Lighthouse on Bass Rocks, and that I think has a kind of sweet humor that I hope people find in the entire show.